Who could have guessed that a single bowl of soup would be enough to bring 200 warriors riding down to surround one man's barn? But that's exactly the story of Jonas Hawk Callahan. A cowboy who had already lost everything, living alone on the edge of nowhere, Hawk never went looking for trouble. Yet one blistering Texas noon, he saw a young Cheyenne girl collapse by the creek on his land. Instead of turning away, he gave her food. He gave her shelter. One small act of mercy. But it was enough to unleash a storm of blood. Because that little girl was no ordinary child. She was the only daughter of Chief Iron Horse. And by nightfall, Hawk stood alone before a circle of 200 warriors, every arrow aimed straight at his heart. The Texas night was so still that every whisper of wind through the dry grass carried like a ghost's voice across the plain. But that silence lasted only a moment, before it was shattered by a heavy, pounding rhythm. The earth itself seemed to throb like a giant's heartbeat. The sound of hooves. They did not come scattered. They did not come by accident. They came in formation, as if the very sky had been commanded by an unseen hand. Out of the darkness, 200 Cheyenne warriors emerged, their silhouettes fanning out into a perfect crescent, tightening around the tiny ranch where a single lantern still flickered. Moonlight bathed the scene, both majestic and terrifying. War paint streaked across faces in red and black, masks of death glinting under the pale glow. Each man held a bow, arrow nocked, strings drawn tight. The creak of leather saddles, the hiss of horses' breath, and the metallic clatter of spears fused into a chilling music, the kind that left no doubt. War had arrived at Hawk's doorstep. At the center of that living wall stood a lone figure beneath the silver light. Jonas Hawk Callahan, broad as an oak, hardened by years of toil, looked suddenly small against the fury gathering before him. He stood barehanded at his horse corral, eyes fixed outward, a single man facing the wrath of 200. There was no escape, no retreat, only a thin breath, a blink of an eye, or one word from the unseen chief could turn the night into slaughter. The hooves pounded on, not in chaos but in rhythm, steady as war drums. Every strike of those horses made the ground quake, as if the earth itself threatened to swallow Hawk whole. His chest trembled with each thud, not from fear, but from the unbearable tension that forges or breaks a man's will. His gaze swept across the ring of faces, young warriors with taut muscles, eager to prove themselves. Scarred veterans who had survived a dozen campaigns and bore the marks of blood and fire. Every pair of eyes burned with the same cold hatred. To them, Hawk was no man. He was the symbol of their grief, the thief who held the life of their most precious child, the only daughter of Iron Horse. A night wind swept through, carrying the song, scents of scorched grass, sweat, leather, and the cold tang of steel. Hawk drew a slow breath, hands clenching and loosening at his sides. He knew, one wrong move, one twitch mistaken for resistance, and those hundreds of arrows would be loosed at once. There'd be nothing left of him to bury. Time seemed suspended. The moon above, cold and merciless, etched the scene into a picture of death. In Hawk's mind, the memories of the past day flared. The starving girl by the creek, her trembling hands, the bowl of stew steaming on his rough-hewn table, the fragile flicker of hope in her eyes. And then, those ceremonial beads, the silver knife, proof she was Iron Horse's only daughter. Proof that by saving her, Hawk had already doomed himself. From somewhere deep in the circle came a cry in Cheyenne. 200 bows lifted in unison, strings groaned, arrows leveled. The sound of tightening sinew cracked across the plain like breaking bones. Hawk did not flinch. His heart hammered like a drum inside his chest, but his eyes stayed steady, the calm of a man who'd stared death in the face before. He knew the only weapon he had was the truth, But would the truth be enough to stop the storm? Texas held its breath. On one side, 200 warriors hungry for blood. On the other, a lone cowboy who dared to show mercy. What ending would the night bring? Hawk would have to prove here and now that kindness was not weakness, that it could be the one bridge left standing between two worlds on the edge of massacre. The Texas sun at noon was a blazing furnace, hanging over the plains like a cruel overseer. Heat shimmered off the dry earth, dust clung to skin and clothes, and the air itself felt brittle. Jonas Hawk Callahan, shirt faded, hat brim pulled low, drove a fence post into the ground by a narrow creek at the edge of his ranch. Sweat ran down his spine, soaking the back of his shirt. His calloused hands swung the hammer in rhythm, the endless chores of a man alone in a land that never gave anything easy. Then something moved at the edge of his sight. At first, Hawk thought it was a mirage, a shape too small, too unsteady, like a bird fallen from its nest. But no. As he squinted past the glare, he saw her, a little girl, stumbling across the brittle grass, weaving toward the creek. She couldn't be more than 8 or 9. Her buckskin dress was torn and ragged, seams long split from wear. Her dark hair hung in filthy tangles. Every step looked like a battle, her eyes wide but vacant, her lips cracked from thirst. Hawk froze, hammer suspended midair. His heart thudded louder than the wind in his ears. A Cheyenne child. On his land. Any settler in these parts would have drawn a rifle without a second thought. Suspicion and blood had soaked the plains for years. Raids, reprisals, endless cycles of killing. Hawk had seen it himself. Whole families gunned down over nothing but rumor. He knew what his neighbors would do if they saw her. Shoot first, ask no questions. But Hawk was not his neighbors. Maybe he was just too weary of death. Maybe it was the memory of his own son, lost to sickness 3 years past. Either way, he couldn't bring himself to turn away. He set the hammer down gently. Instead of reaching for the revolver at his hip, he raised both hands high, palms open to the scorching sun, showing the child he carried no threat. Step by step, he moved closer, slow and careful, the way you'd approach a skittish colt. The distance closed. He could hear her ragged breathing, see her knees buckle as she collapsed by the creek. Her small hands trembled toward her lips, in a gesture more desperate than words. She didn't need to speak. Her body shouted the truth. Water, food, mercy. Hawk's chest tightened. He remembered his boy's eyes in those last days, hollow, pleading, fading. And in that moment, Hawk knew he had no choice. He crouched, voice low and rough but steady. It's all right, little one. I'll help you. She didn't understand the words, but when she saw his empty hands, no gun, no knife, something in her fear flickered. She didn't resist when Hawk stepped closer, then bent and lifted her into his arms. She was light as dry kindling, limp as a fallen branch. Hawk swallowed hard, feeling the fragile weight of a life in his grasp. A life caught between two worlds at war. Under the blazing sun, a lone cowboy carried a starving Cheyenne girl back to his cabin. A sight so strange, so impossible that Hawk knew this was the moment his path had changed forever. A path with no way back. And by nightfall, that path would lead him into the circle of 200 warriors. That was how it began. Hawk's choice, a starving child, and the mercy that set the plains ablaze. But if it were you, standing there by the creek, what would you have done? A. Draw your gun first. B. Do as Hawk did. Reach out your hand. C. Turn away and leave it be. Comment A, B, or C below. I want to know where your heart would stand in this story. Jonas Hawk Callahan's cabin wasn't much. just enough wood and nails to keep the wind out and the rain off his back. The walls had faded gray under the merciless sun. The roof was patched with rough planks, and a single oil lamp hung by the door, lit each evening when the darkness settled over the Texas plain. It wasn't the home of a wealthy man. It wasn't built to impress. It was like its owner, weathered, silent, but stubbornly standing against the years. The door creaked as Hawk pushed it open, carrying the little girl inside. She weighed almost nothing. Holding her felt less like carrying a child and more like lifting a shadow, something fragile enough to vanish with the next breath of wind. Hawk lowered her into the only chair in the room, the chair he sat in at night with a weak cup of coffee, staring out at the endless dark. The Cheyenne child shrank back, wide eyes alert, but too exhausted to resist. Her breaths came shallow and rough, her chest fluttering like a wounded bird. Hawk crossed the room, dipped a ladle into the water barrel, and held it out. He gave a small nod, trying to reassure her. The girl hesitated, suspicion flashing in her gaze. Was this a trick? But survival won. Her trembling hands reached out, raising the dipper to cracked lips. The sound of swallowing echoed in the quiet cabin. Each sip brought life back into her, drop by drop. Water ran down her chin, soaking the rags she wore. But Hawk didn't care. He just stood there, silent, watching. Relief mixed with something sharp in his chest, pain he hadn't let himself feel in years. When her thirst eased, Hawk turned toward the hearth. A pot of venison stew sat cold on the iron stove from the night before, thick with potatoes and roots he'd dug up. He threw on fresh kindling, struck a spark, and soon the flames licked back to life, casting warm light across his sun-hardened face. As the fire crackled, the stew's smell filled the cabin, rich, savory, promising strength. The girl's eyes followed his every move. Her tiny fists clutched at the torn hem of her dress, body stiff as if ready to bolt. But the scent was stronger than her fear. Hunger won. Hawk ladled a bowl, cooled it with steady breaths, and set it before her. She stared as if it were a miracle. Her hands shook as she lifted it, the wooden spoon rattling. And when that first bite touched her lips, it was as if her small body came alive again. She ate with desperate speed, spoon after spoon, as though afraid someone might snatch it away. Tears ran down her cheeks, mixing with the stew, but they weren't tears of fear. They were the tears of life clawing its way back. Hawk's throat tightened as he watched. In his mind, another picture surfaced. 3 years ago, in this very cabin, a little blonde-haired, blue-eyed boy had sat in that chair. His boy. Laughing, babbling about nothing, slurping soup with childish joy. Then came the fever, the endless nights of wet cloths, the rasp of a child's breath growing weaker, until silence fell forever. Hawk had never forgotten his son's eyes in those last hours, tired, pleading, begging for one more breath of peace. And now, across the table, he saw those eyes again in the Cheyenne child. That resemblance broke something inside him. It made the choice for him. He could never turn away. He sat down across from her, elbows on the table, watching her eat without a word. And in that silence, one truth settled in Hawk's chest. By carrying her through his door, he had crossed a line. The kind of line a man doesn't come back from. Others would call him a fool. They'd say he should have left her to fate. But Hawk felt no regret. When the bowl was nearly empty, the girl lifted her head. Food clung to her lips, but in her dark eyes shone something else, something like gratitude. Hawk gave a small nod. It was enough. In that moment, an invisible bond had formed. She needed life. He needed redemption. The wind rattled the worn curtain at the window. Shadows spread across the prairie as night closed in. Hawk sat still, knowing tomorrow the consequences of this choice would arrive at his door. But he also knew one thing. If he'd left her to die, he'd never again find the courage to face himself in the mirror. Hawk wasn't a hero. He was a broken man, tired of blood and vengeance. But tonight, with a trembling child in his care, he'd chosen the hardest road, the road of mercy. The fire in the stove flickered, throwing restless light across the rough wooden walls. The cabin smelled of venison and smoke, warmed by the small body curled in that chair under an old wool blanket. Hawk sat nearby, hands on his knees, eyes never leaving her. Her belly was full now, her breathing even. Sleep tugged at her heavy lids. Hawk pulled the blanket tighter around her, a gesture that felt like a wordless apology to the boy he'd failed to save years ago. But then his eyes caught something beneath her rags, a glimmer in the firelight. Beads. Not ordinary beads, but ceremonial ones, strung in patterns too intricate to be mistaken. Hawk brushed back the torn cloth, and there it was, a sacred necklace, red, white, and blue beads in designs he'd heard described over drinks in Santa Fe. The mark of Iron Horse's bloodline. Hawk's pulse kicked. He remembered the words whispered in every saloon. The chief's only daughter is worth more than any herd of horses. Touch her, even by accident, and you'll pay in blood. And when the blanket slipped further, he saw it. A silver knife at her side, carved with the crest of her people. A rearing horse etched in the hilt. Not a hunting blade, but a symbol. A declaration. This child wasn't just any child. She was Iron Horse's heir. A chill crawled up Hawk's spine. He leaned back, staring at her fragile face as she slept, unaware of the storm her presence carried. He hadn't just rescued a lost girl. He had carried a war into his home. In his mind, Hawk saw what tomorrow would bring. Riders finding her tracks, leading straight here. Would Iron Horse believe his daughter had been rescued? Or that she'd been stolen by a white settler? Hawk had heard enough stories of Iron Horse's wrath. Towns left in ashes, settlers cut down, vengeance carried out without hesitation. And if he thought Hawk had touched his daughter with ill intent, nothing could stop the slaughter. Two forces battled in Hawk's chest, his son's ghost whispering, "Don't abandon her." And the image of 200 warriors, bows drawn, ready to spill his blood for what they believed was justice. He buried his face in his hands. "Lord help me," he muttered. "What have I done?" The wind outside howled against the cabin walls. Hawk raised his head again, staring at the girl. Despite the dirt, despite the danger, her face held a strange innocence. He couldn't send her out into the dark. By saving her, he had chosen to stand against an entire nation. But if he let her die, he would never forgive himself. He thought of his boy again. If someone, anyone, had reached out a hand that day, would his son still be alive? The thought crushed him. He moved to the window, pulled the curtain aside. In the far distance, he thought he saw faint flickers of fire. Was it just his imagination, or the first signal fires of a tribe already searching? Either way, he knew they would come. He looked back at the beads and the silver knife, proof of who she was, and proof the noose tightening around his neck. Hawk sat by her chair once more, whispering, voice rough, "I brought you here. That means I'll carry whatever comes." The fire snapped in the stove, light dancing over Hawk's face, etched with the weight of a man who knew his life had just shifted course forever. He now knew the truth. The child he'd rescued wasn't just any lost girl. She was the only daughter of Chief Iron Horse. An act of mercy had become a death sentence. And now I'll put it to you, if you were in Hawk's boots, what would you choose? 1. Keep the girl, no matter the danger. 2. Try to return her to her people at once. 3. Hide the truth and pray no one finds out. Drop your answer in the comments, 1, 2, or 3, and tell me where your heart stands in this story. Evening settled heavy over the Texas prairie, the sky fading from blood-red west to violet east. Inside the small cabin, Hawk sat by the fire, glancing at the Cheyenne girl curled beneath a blanket. He didn't know that across the fence line, Jed Turner watched. Jed's jaw clenched at the sight. A white man sheltering an Indian child. That was enough to spark the prairie into flame. He spurred his horse hard toward town, knowing one whisper would spread like wildfire. By nightfall came a knock. Hawk's hand went to the rifle, but a familiar voice called, "It's Reverend Matthews." Hawk opened the door to find Matthews, Deputy Roy Fletcher, and Jed Turner, rage blazing in his eyes. Roy's voice was gravel. "Hawk, folks say you've got a redskin girl here." Jed shoved forward. "Don't deny it." "I saw her myself," Matthews raised a calming hand. "Iron Horse's daughter's been missing 3 days. Riders are searching. Signal fires burn on the ridge." The words hit Hawk like a hammer. Jed spat. "You planning to trade her?" "Sell her?" Hawk's eyes went cold. "I found her starving by the creek, Jed. I fed her. If it was your child, what would you have me do?" Jed faltered, but Roy stepped in, voice heavy. "Hawk, this is bad. If Iron Horse's men find her here, they won't wait for talk. They'll call it kidnapping." Matthews gripped Hawk's shoulder. "One wrong step and blood will spill. Not just yours, the whole town's." Hawk looked back at the girl, still asleep, blanket clutched tight. For a moment he saw his own son, gone to sickness years ago. His heart twisted. Roy's tone softened but remained firm. "You've got 2 choices. Return her, or start a war." Matthews whispered, "Even good men get swallowed by storms." The 3 men left. The cabin fell into silence, heavy as stone. Hawk leaned against the door, fists white. Outside, coyotes howled. On the horizon, faint red flickers pulsed. Signal fires. The Cheyenne were already moving. His mind raced. 3 roads lay before him. First, surrender. Hand her back, hope for mercy. But he knew too well. One night under his roof would brand him guilty. Second, flight. Hitch the wagon, vanish south. But no one outran Cheyenne scouts. Flight meant certain death. Third, stand. Face them with only the truth, that he had saved a starving child. But truth was thin armor against 200 arrows. He sat again, studying her dirt-streaked face, her fragile breaths. Memory blurred. His son at 4 years old, smiling, clutching a carved wooden bear before fever stole him away. Since then, the cabin had been hollow, the fire cold. Now fate had given him another chance. Not to change the past, but to refuse to repeat it. He rose, staring out the window. The night wind carried smoke. Then came the sound, low, relentless drums rolling across the prairie. Not the cries of a hunt. This was order, vengeance, war. Hawk closed his eyes. The sound was more than a signal. It was a sentence. He turned back to the girl, adjusted her blanket, brushed her tangled hair. If he gave her up, maybe he'd live, but as a coward. If he kept her, he might die, but he'd die clean. The drums grew louder. The Texas sky pressed down like iron. Hawk drew a long breath. His decision was made. No surrender, no flight. He would stand. He would protect her, no matter the cost. And so, against the fire's glow, his shadow stood tall as the war drums rolled in, assassin from the horizon. Tonight Hawk had faced 3 roads. He chose the hardest, stand and shield the child, even as the storm closed in. If you were there, which road would you take? Play it safe. Surrender the child to save your own skin. B. Flee. Risk everything on a desperate escape. Stand. Face the warriors beside Hawk, even if it ends in blood. Comment A, B, or C below. I want to know where you stand in this story. The Texas moon hung high and cold, washing the plains in silver. From the north came the drums, slow, relentless, the heartbeat of war. Hawk stood at his cabin window, breath held, as shadows emerged. Cheyenne warriors, hundreds strong, horses moving as one, ranks silent, painted faces turned to phantoms beneath the moon. The cordon tightened until every bowstring pointed at him. Hawk stepped back, sweat prickling. He had faced soldiers before, but never a wall like this. 200 warriors, one command from unleashing death. Behind him the girl stirred, eyes wide with terror. She clutched his sleeve, gesturing frantically, lips, chest, hands breaking apart. Hawk's gut twisted. She hadn't, just wandered. Someone among her own had abandoned her, and now all blame pointed at him. A voice rang out in English. "White man, you hold what belongs to us. Give her back if you want to see dawn." The ranks parted. Iron Horse rode forward, broad-chested, hair streaked with silver, scars mapping old battles. He dismounted, bare feet striking earth like thunder. His voice rolled deep. "You stole my blood. You kept my daughter to barter for your life. You think a child is yours to bargain?" Rage rippled through the warriors. Spears lifted. Hawk felt the noose tighten. He stepped onto the porch, hands raised, voice steady though his chest pounded. "I didn't steal her. I found her starving by the creek. I gave her food. I gave her rest." Iron Horse's eyes narrowed. "And we should believe a drifter's word?" Hawk knew words weren't enough. Slowly, he drew a scrap of cloth from his coat. Bows creaked as men aimed, but he lifted it high. Cheyenne stitching, stained with dried blood. "I found this on my fence," he said. A warrior carried it to Iron Horse. The chief turned it over, the fabric from his daughter's ceremonial dress. His face remained stone, but his eyes flickered. Hawk pressed on. He fetched a clay bowl from inside, streaked with dried venison stew, and set it in the dirt. "If she was a hostage, I wouldn't have fed her. Or covered her with a blanket," murmurs spread through the ranks. Doubt edged into the silence. Then Hawk pulled his last card, a weathered photograph. His voice broke as he held it up. "My wife. My boy. Both gone to sickness. 3 years passed. I held my son as he gasped for breath, and lost him forever. Since then, this house has been nothing but silence." In the firelight, Iron Horse saw the faint smiles of a woman and child. His jaw stayed hard, but a shadow crossed his eyes. Hawk's voice roughened. "When I saw your daughter, I didn't see an enemy's child. I saw my boy again. I couldn't save him, but I couldn't turn away this time." The line of warriors wavered. Hands loosened on weapons. Some eyes lowered. Hawk let the photo fall into the dust. He met Iron Horse's stare. "Kill me if you must. But before you do, look at her. She's alive because I chose to save her." Silence stretched, vast as the prairie. The wind moaned through grass. The fire crackled. Hawk's heart thundered in the stillness. He had laid down every proof. Torn cloth, empty bowl, faded photo. His fate now hung in Iron Horse's eyes, caught between vengeance and truth, between the fury of a chief and the grief of a father. If you were trapped in that circle tonight, whose side would you stand on? Hawk, the man who dared save a child and face a nation. Iron Horse, the father who believes the tribe's justice cannot bend. The young warriors, hot-blooded, demanding blood for blood. Comment 1, 2, or 3 below. I want to know where your heart lies in this standoff. The air was strung, tight as a bowstring. Hawk stood beneath the Texas moon, facing Iron Horse and 200 Cheyenne warriors. He had laid down every proof he could muster, and for a heartbeat, hope flickered, until a roar split the night. Blood for blood! Broken Spear spurred his red horse forward, spear leveled at Hawk's chest. The chief's daughter, kept in a white man's cabin, that is disgrace. We need justice now. The ranks erupted, voices rolling like thunder. Kill him! Kill the white man! Spears lifted, bows creaked. Only Iron Horse stood silent, his eyes storm clouds. Hawk didn't move. He knew fear would damn him, yet cowering would too. So he stood tall, sweat cold on his temple. Broken Spear's horse surged closer, spear inches from his chest. Hawk met his eyes, steady, unflinching, daring him to strike. Then, it happened. A hiss split the air. An arrow, loosed from the mob, streaked for Hawk's heart. Death came too fast to dodge, but a blur of motion intervened. The chief's daughter. She flung herself forward, arms wide. The arrow struck her shoulder, knocking her into Hawk's arms. The prairie fell silent. Blood seeped across her blanket. Her eyes, brimming but unafraid, locked on Hawk. I trust him with my life. The warriors froze. The chief's daughter had shielded a white man. Whispers rippled through the ranks. Even Broken Spear faltered. Iron Horse stepped forward, gaze fixed on his child's wound. For the first time, the fire in his eyes faltered, replaced by the pain of a father. Hawk eased her down, voice hoarse. You see? She trusts me, enough to take an arrow meant for me. Every warrior waited for their chief's judgment. The night balanced on a knife's edge. Then the girl stirred. Despite the wound, she pushed Hawk aside and rose, trembling yet fierce. Her voice rang out in Cheyenne, high and quivering, but strong enough to shake 200 hearts. She told her story, swept away in the storm, lost, starving, ready to die by the creek, until Hawk found her. A white man who never drew his gun, who gave her soup, a blanket, a roof. That, she said, was why she still breathed. Murmurs rose, the fire of vengeance dimming. Hawk couldn't grasp the words, but he saw the warriors' faces shift, struck by the truth in her voice. She walked to Broken Spear, stopping just short of his spear. Her voice cut sharp, this time plain enough for Hawk to understand. If your child were lost, would you want a stranger to abandon him, or to save him? The question ripped through the night. Broken Spear trembled, but had no answer. Spears lowered, eyes turned inward, fathers and mothers seeing their own children in her. Iron Horse's stern mask cracked. His daughter's courage had spoken louder than the mob. She spoke once more, softer but heavy as stone. Hawk had looked at her not as a captive, but with the gaze of a father who had once lost everything. The prairie went still, weapons lowered, rage ebbed into shame, and in that silence the voice of a child had shattered the tide of hate. That night, before 200 warriors, she risked her life to shield Hawk, then spoke the truth. Her courage swayed the tribe's hearts. If you had stood in that circle that night, whose side would you have taken? A Hawk, the man who saved a child and faced down death. B. Broken Spear, the warrior who believed only blood could cleanse shame. C. Iron Horse, the father torn between vengeance and his daughter's truth. Comment A, B, or C below. Tell me where your heart lies in this standoff. The Texas night lay heavy, broken only by torchlight. Hawk was led into the Cheyenne heartland, a valley of teepees circling a roaring fire. Drums beat slow and solemn, hundreds of eyes fixed on him with anger and suspicion. At the head rode Iron Horse, tall as a war god. His young daughter walked at his side, her gaze fixed on Hawk, the only fragile shield between him and death. They halted before 7 elders gathered around the flames. Iron Horse raised his hand. Silence fell. "This is Hawk Callahan," he thundered. "He kept my daughter in his cabin. Some say he kidnapped her. Some say he saved her. Tonight, the council decides." An elder with white hair leaned forward, voice rasping. "The law is clear. Whoever touches the children of the tribe commits a crime. Tradition demands blood." Murmurs of assent rose. Hawk's heart pounded, but he stood tall. Another elder spoke more slowly. "But if he saved the girl, gratitude must be weighed. To deny compassion blinds us to grace." The council divided, voices clashing like storm winds. A scarred elder slammed his palm on the earth. "White men always betray us. Soup and blankets cannot erase blood." The crowd roared in agreement. Hawk felt the knife edge of fate pressing closer. Then a frail voice pierced the uproar. The oldest elder, thin as ash, lifted his head. "I remember a drought, 30 years past. I collapsed by a creek. A white man carried me back, gave me water, saved my life." His name was Callahan. Hawk froze. His father. The elder's gaze pinned him. "Your eyes, they are his. Because of Callahan, I live. Now his son has saved the daughter of Iron Horse. What is this, if not the turning of the great wheel?" A hush fell. Hawk's name no longer drew only suspicion, but astonishment. The past had reached into the present. The council murmured, their tone shifting. Mercy began to rise among the calls for blood. Hawk trembled, hope breaking through at last. Then the girl stepped forward. Blood stained her shoulder, but her eyes burned bright. She stood beside Hawk, voice ringing in Cheyenne. Hawk could not understand, but Iron Horse's stare never left her. An elder translated. "She says he would save another child again, even if it cost his life." The words cut the crowd deeper than any blade. Warriors lowered their spears. Rage ebbed. A child's trust had undone vengeance. The eldest elder rose, staff in hand. "You have heard. The ancestors have seen. The chief's daughter speaks truth, and truth is our guide. Hawk Callahan, the council declares you no enemy, but ally. You are under Cheyenne protection, so long as you swear. If ever one of ours, or yours, needs aid, you will give it." Hawk's throat tightened. He whispered, "I swear." A sigh swept through the crowd like the prairie exhaling. Iron Horse studied Hawk, his fury not gone but tempered by respect. The girl smiled, slipped her hand into Hawk's, and raised it high by the fire. A white cowboy and a Cheyenne child stood together, shadows dancing across the earth. The eldest elder's voice closed the circle. "Courage is not only in raising spears or pulling triggers. Courage is in offering bread to a hungry child." The words echoed with the drums, carved into the Texas night. Hawk bowed his head, heart overflowing. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight he and the child had become a bridge, fragile but shining. Beneath the Texas night, the story closes, but its echo lingers. Hawk, a lonely cowboy, and a fragile Cheyenne girl showed us that mercy can outmatch arrows, and a single bowl of soup can change the fate of 2 worlds. Haven't we all carried loss, endured misunderstandings, and longed for a hand outstretched in kindness? Sometimes, one heart willing to listen can heal distances that felt unbridgeable. If this story touched your heart, leave a simple mark in the comments below, even a number or a letter, to let us know your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us each week for more tales of humanity, hope, and the courage it takes to keep kindness alive. Tell me, friends, is the greatest bravery not in raising a gun, but in offering food to a hungry child?